think it was this past weekend, or
yeah.
eating lobsters. Were there
Eating
lobsters involved?
There were lobsters.
How many lobsters did you consume over the course of the weekend?
I think we ate several amongst us. And I think the price has been holding up this year.
I thought it was dropped because of the tariffs and not so many going to Asia. That was what I read in some poo-poo publication like the New York Times or something like that. Lots to talk about. Twin River.
Twin River.
Twin River. I think when you were head of economic development, it was a bankrupt Lincoln Greyhound racetrack.
Well,
was that about what it was?
I was thinking when I heard the story of the deal that they just announced. You know, I was thinking back to the Lincoln Greyhound Park, right?
There were indictments.
Rhode Islanders all knew, you know, exactly where the Greyhound Park used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
And oh my goodness, how far have they come now to execute this deal? You probably understand it better than me. I read just the press coverage, so I haven't seen any of the documents.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not your average financial deal.
No, sir.
And on the surface, you know, lots of questions, but on the surface, I mean, good for them. I mean, we like when Rhode Island entities expand.
Absolutely.
And then as the old economic development guy in me wants to know, like, where the headquarters jobs going to be?
They're coming here.
Are they going to be
Yep.
here?
John Taylor confirmed last night via message at about 10 or 11 o'clock. Headquarters is here. They're going public. I think that's, you know, we don't have a lot of public companies on
public without an IPO. That's pretty smart.
That's right. They're leveraging. I think it's one of those, you know, the other Dover's public. So they're going to leverage that and switch that around.
I mean, here, it's a merger technically.
Right.
Yeah, but they're basically, you know,
the acquirer.
They're buying a company that is going to be what, like a little over 7% of the total company.
Right.
Right. You know, so it's the, you know, so here they acquire that, and they don't have to go through all the formal going public because they acquire a company that is public.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden they can change the name, issue the stock. You know, well, it remains to be seen. It's a private company, Twin River, that owns the public.
Right.
So whenever that happens, I like to know, just because I'm, you know, curious this way.
Who owns what?
Yeah, who owns? Who are the private owners?
Yeah.
Right. And are they cashing out?
Yeah.
Or are they just converting into stock? I imagine it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some people taking some money, some chips, let's use them.
Yeah, right.
Some chips off the table.
Right.
Right. And then they also, I saw in the coverage that they were going to do, you know, they were going to offer more stock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so again, what's the use of that capital? What are they going to do with it? Is it to buy out the owners, or is it to reinvest in growth? And how much of that growth happens outside of Rhode Island that creates some headquarters jobs here?
So listen, I think we're going to see some details coming out. I assume that it's partially to pay off the Dover folks. I think it's partially to go out and buy some more stuff. I mean, that's generally the strategy isn't to stay the same. And you know, listen, I've known John Taylor back to when he was functionally maybe the most junior staffer to then Governor Ed Dupree, picking up laundry for the governor. And he's just been slow and steady, building. And, you know, Gary, before you said, listen, he was pretty much always good for his word. And they've just kept going after these things one at a time, building things. And, you know, maybe the most untold story of trying to locate a place like Newport Grand in Tiverton. I don't know what the final count was, but I know that he probably did upwards of 100 meetings with people around kitchen tables and in living rooms, talking to folks who lived in Tiverton. And it, you know, it only passed by, I think, 100 votes or something like that. It was a tiny little margin. And it was all on the back of him going out and talking to people, asking them what they needed and what they wanted, and here were the benefits, and hopefully that they would trust him. And, you know, I think he's been good for that.
Well, their timing, you know, has been good. You know, they went through the big heavy slog to get the original,
absolutely,
you know, kind of Lincoln-based thing done. This more recent edition, I mean, the economy's bad. The state's been, you know, kind of desperate, you know, for cash flow. You know, so they kind of put it through. In an innovation discussion, of course, we have to talk about the disruption of this whole industry. Because look how quickly we've gone from, you know, the monopoly, we're only Las Vegas, only Las Vegas and Atlantic City, and then whatever, you know, state, you know, could muster the legislative will to put it into now where every corner. And so now the question becomes not just can you build physical structures that people go to,
right,
but it's all the online piece. Right?
Absolutely.
And what are the regulations that are going to exist around that? And in the end, I think you're going to see a slowdown in building casinos, right? And you're going to see an increase in these online platforms. And once you get beyond just the business issue here, then I look at it from the standpoint of what are the nature of the jobs that this produces here in our local economy. What is the impact of people who use these things heavily? And how do you deal with that as a community? I don't like when the state becomes more dependent
right,
on it, and to the point where it is now, you'd have to say we are dependent on that.
100%. We would completely change state government,
which isn't good.
Which is not necessarily good. And I think you lay up the key element of all this, which is this is an industry inches away from huge technology upheaval. You saw it a little bit with DraftKings and some of the others. Now that's going to break loose with this Las Vegas style sports betting. The pie in New England isn't getting any bigger, but there's more players. MGM opening up in Springfield. You've got a Wynn facility or whatever it's going to be rebranded as up in the Boston area. You've got Tiverton opening up. You've still got the Connecticut casinos.
Right.
The number of players are not increasing, nor is what they spent.
The thing we have to watch really carefully is when it's just Rhode Island based, they have a shared interest in this cash flow that supports
Absolutely.
Our state government.
Mm-hmm.
The minute they go national,
Yep.
they have a whole portfolio where they mitigate their risk, right? Then our local interests
That's right.
aren't as well protected, right? Because they can offset competitive challenges here in Rhode Island, with other installations or online things that they do outside of the state.
Absolutely.
And so we have to pay attention to our interests here in Rhode Island to make sure that that revenue stream, that we can mitigate it, create other revenue streams, or protect it. So we can't assume that they're aligned. We can't assume that
Absolutely. And we saw when IGT, GTech got purchased by the Italian company, then ultimately got rebranded as IGT. The number of jobs actually taking place in Rhode Island has shrunk to a tiny fraction of what it used to be. And
well, they delivered on their promise when we did the deal. That put their headquarters here, back in the GTech days.
Yep.
They have lived up to their obligations.
Well, they missed last year, and they got punished
they've
accordingly.
But they've stayed on it.
Yep.
And they didn't wholesale try to get out
Yep.
of those obligations. But you're absolutely right. Now this is a global organization. A lot of the interest has started to shift, so we have to pay attention to that too, and our local interests. But it's the same in every story. We know that when industry is contained here in Rhode Island, like the good old days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we had more of those jobs, and people had more of a community interest. And as these things nationalize and globalize,
that's why we like the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center less so than the Bank of America Broadcast Center. Let me tell you that much.
Well, we have to be vigilant, and we should be proactive, because you don't want to wake up one day relying on a big
empty Superman building like that.
And then you have an empty industry, an empty company that kind of lives. So I'm sure folks are paying attention to that from through the Rhode Island lens. But putting that all aside, good for the local team.
Yep.
On getting bigger, diversifying, and I hope that does create economic impact here in Rhode Island, not just by increasing the footprint of gambling locations here, but by supporting a national network that creates some jobs here, because those are good jobs, those headquarter jobs.
Hasn't been this
really
good
nice.
since Raymond Patriarch owned a piece of the sands in Vegas, right? I think he owned a piece in Cuba too, as well.
We had the regional headquarters.
That's right.
In Rhode
Almost the
Island.
national headquarters. We were right there vying for the national headquarters.
We had the headquarters jobs here.
My favorite was that Raymond Sr. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin owned a racetrack in Western Mass. That was a good one as well.
The thing that is always amazing to me, because I'm not from Rhode Island, although I've been here a long time, and as you listen to Crime Town and you learn the history of this thing, literally it is true, we were the regional headquarters.
Yeah.
And it came with headquarters jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
which we can debate whether that was positive or negative for the economy, but it lasted a long time.
Let's see, on Friday, 3 communities in New England realized bird scooters. We just saw one zip by.
I thought I saw them coming in
Yeah,
here today.
one came by. It was Somerville, Cambridge, and Providence.
Yep.
Did not hit Boston.
Yep.
They are
Okay.
little scooters. You swipe with an app. It costs $1 to engage, and then 15 cents a mile.
Okay.
A minute, excuse me, 15 cents a minute. Unregulated.
Regulated, untethered, right?
Untethered.
Do you leave it wherever?
Wherever you want.
You leave it wherever it is, and then somebody goes and retrieves it,
Yep.
and recharges it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, said on late Friday, he said if they bring them into this city, we'll dump them off at the tow yard, and we'll collect them and dump them. So they're getting a mixed reactions in cities and towns. A little strange. I mean, I like the guerrilla marketing part of it, but they do go 15 miles an hour. There's not a lot of regulation to them. Are we hitting the outer banks of scooter sharing?
I think you're going to have, I don't think we're hitting the outer banks. I think we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I think there's one right over there, actually.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing companies and new business models that are springing up, based on what customers want, right? And what these millennials want are lots and lots of different transportation options. They want to jump on motorized bikes, on scooters, on hoverboards, if that's
Yeah, absolutely.
like whatever it is, and they want pedestrian-friendly living with easy transportation back and forth, and that bumps square into traditional industrial era transportation systems, right? And some of them are going to get disrupted. Some of us are going to get disrupted when we see these different forms of transportation, and as usual, the regulators are going to be behind.
Right,
This
absolutely.
stuff is all going to start happening, and then all of a sudden, regulators are going to wake up, or lobbyists are going to try to wake them up. To say, for the big song and dance around how, this isn't fair, this isn't right. In the meantime, customers enjoy getting from A to B in an inexpensive and convenient way, and you have to think through what's the right regulatory framework, not because some existing system got disrupted, but because there are real safety risks around having unlimited forms of transportation, all trying to use the same sidewalks and infrastructure, and you're going to find that there are going to be accidents, right? So I'm for the right balanced regulation, but it can't be knee-jerk regulation just to stop innovation and to stop new forms of mobility. But you're just beginning to see these new forms of mobility, and young people, millennials, love those things. That thing just happened, and already just driving over here today,
Right.
I think I saw 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to wonder, okay, what's their right of way? What part of the road do they use or not use?
We have a piece going up tomorrow. 3 of the rules are you're not supposed to ride on sidewalks.
Okay.
You're supposed to be 18 years old or older, and you're supposed to be wearing a helmet. And we have some photos of a young teen on a sidewalk whipping along without a helmet.
Yeah, so they'll need to call back the legislature. Like, we'll have to have a special session, just to deal, with quick and hurry regulation.
It will happen if some 14-year-old implants himself and
that'll speed it up. I'm good with the puns today, aren't I?
that's right. Feel like the beginning of Law and Order. Jerry Orbach.
That's pretty funny.
Talking about it.
But what I worry about is that what will happen is there'll be regulatory overreach, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone will come jumping in, talking about why.
But you just saw an instance in Missouri. Everything seems to be happening in Missouri, in which an Uber Lyft driver was real-time streaming his passengers via a third party on a pay-for-play, monetizing it. And no state law regulated it, but his driver's agreement with Lyft and Uber were both violated,
Right.
and he has subsequently been
Yeah.
fired.
Yep.
You know, there's
Well,
for every action
you
there's
can
a
never anticipate everything that you might need some rule for.
Right.
Right. And so what happens is, particularly in these days, in the 21st century, right, there's a lot of folks that are trying more stuff. That's a good thing.
Yep.
Now what happens is somebody does something and all of a sudden we wake up and say, well, wait a minute, there's no rule against live streaming. In fact, the rules actually allow for it.
one-party consent.
Right, right.
Same in Rhode Island.
Right, and so all of a sudden, then somebody says, wait a minute, what about
Here comes one.
What about my right to privacy, right? Does
No
somebody
helmet
driving
on the sidewalk.
Does somebody driving an Uber, like, actually have a right to film, and live stream,
Right.
what we're doing? And that's what's happening, right? They pull into my driveway, now people see where I live, and all the stuff, right? And so now you end up with who's going to set the rules? What's the process for setting rules that reflects the balanced needs of the community?
Right.
Right? And how much confidence do we have in our legislative bodies to set reasonable, rules that keep our community and society moving forward? I don't know how you feel about it. I'm a little leery, of the rules get set by the loudest lobbyist, that's up there, spinning a story. We've got serious, challenges that we've got to address. We've got a lot of innovation and a lot of new technology, and we're going to have to be able to set rules. They're going to move over time, right? Because one set of rules today, out of date, tomorrow. We gotta get
Or by noon today.
much better at how we govern technology and how we balance the interests of us as individuals, and the community as a whole, and we could get a whole lot better at understanding the individual interest in this.
Bird scooters I saw uttered was, I can't remember if it's a tweet or a comment in here at Go Local, seems to be a personal injury attorney's dream. Will litigation become the regulating factor?
Well, I think litigation always plays a factor in this. I think it's always a system, right? So
Right.
it's always what rules are in place, right? What's the legal environment, in the litigation, environment, and who's going to challenge, what part of it? I think this is going to continue to play out with all these new technologies. I don't think there's anything unique about this one.
You talk about millennials and their
Yep.
different behavior in transportation, obviously living in cities, working in cities, all those things. Are we missing the impending doom, and I mean doom to our economy, for the auto industry? Is anybody, we almost had the auto industry go down in 07, 08. The federal government stepped in and lent hundreds of billions of dollars to the auto industry to keep it afloat. Should we be mindful of that as an economy? That one of the biggest sectors of our economy may not even be prepared for what may switch over in a relatively quick period of time.
Well, it already is. You could see the large auto. If you think of yourself as being in the auto industry, right, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Right. You have got to be in the transportation and mobility business, right? And you have to find models and systems and business models that get people from A to B. If you think you're in the auto industry, right,
But I don't
what's
see it.
happening.
But I don't see it. I don't see Chris Hurd talking about anything other than Chevrolets. He's not talking about the new scooter or the new this or the new that.
They do talk about it, but in the mainstream of the conversation we should be having is about autonomous vehicles, right? That's the big technology play, right? Where all the big
Driverless cars.
right? Driverless cars, and where the tech companies out in Silicon Valley, are developing the software and the tools, and the auto industry had been slow to react, not anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to cede the space to the tech companies, and they're aggressively doing their exploration, R&D, product concepts, in this space. So I think they're not going to cede the transportation business, right, and let the auto industry, go the way of the dinosaur. they're going to do everything in their power to reinvent themselves. The question is it too little too late, right? Or are the tech companies going to own the most important part of this capability set? I think the notion of different forms of transportation and different models, right? You can watch what Uber's doing. They don't view themselves as solely in the ride sharing business. They have a relationship with one of those scooter companies.
Absolutely, they've invested in one, or
aggressively doing exactly what Burr is doing here in Rhode Island, and they've got more locations than this company has. So it's going to be a fight to go through the same regulatory game that they did with ride sharing, and they continue to go through with ride sharing.
well, we see the consolidation. Chinese company, I think it's called OHO, which was in dozens of cities, just announced Thursday that they were laying off 70% of their U.S. workforce in their scooter play. It was a bike sharing model more than a scooter sharing model. Will we see ultimately a shakeout like we saw in kind of the deal space, where now it seems like Groupon's the only one barely surviving, and now they've said that they're going to sell out as well? Will we just see, model after model, venture, private equity, and then at the end of the day, one wins or two wins?
I think we're in an era. First of all, yes, we're going to see the proliferation of lots of new models.
Yeah.
Right. Different consumer groups, and models to fit that consumer group.
Yeah.
I think this notion of one winner takes all, I think is industrial era thinking. I think we're going to be in this churn for a long time. I think new technologies are going to come, new models are going to be possible, right? And different consumers want models that fit their needs. They don't want to fit into a model that doesn't. And so I think this idea that there's one winner in every traditional industry, I think we're in this era of constant churn, new models, new ways to meet customer needs, and what we need are the other parts of these systems, including the regulatory, and legal piece, right, to start to figure out how we're going to deal with that, because it's not going to change. I don't think this is going to slow down. I don't think we're just in a temporary thing and then we can go back to business as usual. I think we're going to be in business of constant new technologies, opening up new capabilities, opening up new ways to solve customer challenges, and new models are going to emerge to do that. The regulatory schemes that lasted for 30 years are history.
So it seems like the EU is ahead of us in being able to slap back misbehaving technology companies for violating privacy rules, and with meaningful penalties. I think it was Google last week, 5 or 6 billion. 5 billion.
Right.
Even if you're Google, 5 billion's got to hurt a little bit.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
What kind of day do we live in now? Where a $5 billion fine, which, by the way, isn't the worst part of it because they'll appeal that.
Right.
It's the rules that are going to go in place that they're going to have to conform with that change how they deliver service.
And they'll write off the $5 billion penalty.
Even Google, even if the penalty stays at $5 billion, right? We live in a world now where you would think that was real money, to Google, that's a speed bump. Right? Which is amazing to say. Imagine saying that $5 billion is a speed bump.
That's the way it is here around Go Local.
Right.
Uh-huh.
But to your point about, is Europe out ahead on some of these issues? I think they've been further ahead at some of these new models, responding more, particularly in the big urban centers across Europe. A lot of these it used to be we owned all the technology and all the technology startups, here in America. But not true anymore. I mean, you can travel around the world and see spots for this, where these new technologies emerge, where particularly the new business models, the ways to do this, the way consumers want to, they want to go from having to own the asset to be able to have access to the asset.
Right.
They want to go from, this is the only way I get from A to B, and somebody regulates that, decides for me how to get there, to having access to lots of different choices about how to get from A to B. And you're starting to see that. A bicycle, a scooter, a motorized bicycle, you're going to keep seeing these things, and they're going to keep coming. And we are so far behind in our ability to have good community conversations about the implications in order to, to make sure we've got the right level of regulation to allow these new models.
Well, listen, how do you, right? On Thursday, there was no bird scooter. On Friday, there was a bird scooter.
And they're out of session. So now,
right.
And so by the time they come back into session, and then.
But the city, I mean, the city's not capable, right? The city can't get, it could be a nuisance, it's a violation, you can't have any kind of motorized thing on a sidewalk, they could be enforcing it. They're just not capable of it.
Oh, that's right.
Let's just go to Uber for 1 second. Latest reports is 10 more senior executive blown out already this year. Some of these jobs, and I'm talking senior C-suite positions, have turned 3-4 times in 3 years. I get innovation and I get building the right team, but at some point, that's got to speak to, there's 2 CEOs, an interim CEO, directors of marketing in and out, like, what does all this mean? And are we now at a little bit of a worry stage? Yes, there's revenue, and yes, there's this, but it's not a profitable company. Something does not seem right.
Well, I think this is culture doesn't change that quickly. You can change the CEO, but in order to create the kind of culture, the behaviors in the organization, that you're looking for when you're that size and you're growing that fast, right? I think you still have a lot of the remnants of what preceded this new CEO.
Yeah.
He is working it. There's going to be a lot of turnover, in management ranks for a while, until he gets the team, that understands that he means it when he says we're going to change the culture. I don't think those commercials, are just puff. He knows he needs to change the culture. They have a winning model, but the culture needs to change, and he'll have to accept the trade-offs in the model and growth that come along with that. They did win the charm offensive back in London, you noticed, where they got booted out, and now the new CEO is personally focused, and they put on the charm offensive, and it worked, and now they're back in London. Right. So
in Dublin, they're not.
Right.
You use your Uber app, you get a taxi.
Yeah, it's still not.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. There's still pushback, but they're still growing. I believe the new CEO is focused on the right thing, but it's hard, and you're going to still see turnover, in terms of leadership, because there's going to be a lot of sensitivity to the environment. I saw the HR exec just left. A lot of people are complaining about the work conditions, and some of that is a remnant of what preceded the new CEO, but it's real, and you've got to pay attention to it, and I think the new CEO is going to continue to stay focused and work on this.
Great. Last but not least, maybe most importantly, the opportunity for Americans, Rhode Islanders, to change their lives. Biff,
yes, there you go.
18. What do we have coming this September,
Yeah.
right after the primaries, 13th and 14th of September?
Week.
It could not be a busier week at Go Local Land.
Yes, that's the same week, so September 13th
Electoral
and 14th.
chaos, innovation galore.
Well, it's so inspiring right now for our team and for me. I love this time because every year at this time, I talk personally with every single of the storytellers or speakers. We have 32 of them, and I talk with each of them, not to prescribe what their story is, but to just check in. I really want them to understand what they got themselves into, which is a stage where you're expected to be genuine, you're expected to share a personal story about transformation, and I want to make sure that they understand it. So I'm right in the midst of these calls. I mean, you want to talk about 32 of the most interesting, inspiring calls I have all year round. It's really great fun. I always share a storyteller
Please.
With you here.
We're waiting.
Yes, yes. So
it wasn't Larry the Lobster up in Maine this week, who gave his life to Biff and the Kaplan family.
Although he did go to a microbrewery up there that was pretty cool that we thought might be a candidate for a minute. I thought Emily,
after the seventh drink.
Emily Levy is a recent Rhode Islander. I always like to have some local innovators there, and I always like to have youth She's out of Babson 2 years, went to, learned entrepreneurship there, and learned it in a way that Babson teaches, which is about experience and
Right.
personally do it. So here's a story of someone who, we can relate to this here in New England, got Lyme disease. It took a long time for her diagnosis to be made. She had a very, very serious, kind of Lyme disease journey, and it got so serious that she had to have a PICC line because
Oh,
she
my.
needed infusion. So pretty
Yeah.
serious stuff. And I can talk about it because she tells the story personally about having this PICC line in her arm. And having the clothing and that went around it, and kind of the band that went around it, like paying no attention to design and making it feel good. So literally in college, started a business called Mighty Well, right? And next thing you know, she is producing and sourcing and selling as a college student, right, all over the country, and now expanding her line.
Very similar to my experience. My senior year at URI, I learned how to tie my shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a
she's-
big,
and
big.
here's someone actually
Right.
starting and scaling a business here in Rhode Island. You're going to hear about her certainly at the summit, but you're going to hear about her beyond that. She's an amazing, inspiring youth, starting something real that meets a personal need that a lot of people challenge for. And Emily Lead is going to share that story
Great.
on the stage, at BIF 2018. So we're really excited about that.
Excellent. Well, Saul, as always, thank you so much. A great journey around the world and Providence. Be careful when you leave the
I'm gonna take
building.
a scooter home
There
with me,
is bird scooters that could run your
Take a scooter
buttocks over at every turn. They are unregulated. If you block their motion, they'll probably sue you. Because they won't be wearing helmets. So to the victor goes the spoils. And we won't see you next week, but we'll see you the week after. Is that right? Or we see you next week. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Business Monday. It was a wild and woolly day, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon, I believe at 3 o'clock with Rachel Nunes, who's got lots of news and lots of interesting things going on. And then I think we've got Kate Nagel right afterwards. Thanks everybody for tuning in at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. He's Saul Kaplan. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see.